And then when it, for
An hour ago. Her office is like on the block.
It's going to be weird.
No, she can't. She's right across the hall from Deborah Bremer's portrait society. I'm going to find out where she
Thanks for coming this evening. Appreciate you being with us today. The run of the show looks like this. I'm about to introduce our prestigious Vice President of the board. Oh, yes. Damn. Oh, yes, she is. It will follow with my remarks, and then after that we have a panel of some of our directors to talk, and then we'll have a closing moment. And then hopefully get some time to be together and talk. So this is the wonderful and prestigious Angela Lang, who is both our VP of the board as well as a wonderful executive director who is a fantastic peer to me, who runs Block. And with that, I will turn it over to Angela. Thank you. Woo! See, I can one. Good evening. My name is Angela Lang. I use she, her pronouns, and I proudly serve as the Vice President of the ACLU board. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be here. I started my journey with the ACLU in 2007 in my senior year of high school at Riverside.
Oh my gosh.
ACLU was the first organization I got involved with. I started the Student Association at UWM, and quite frankly, the rest is history. The ACLU has made me the badass organizer I am today. An opportunity presented itself almost 10 years ago to join the board, and I was elated. A lot has changed in our world and our state between then and now, and so has the ACLU. A pivotal moment for the ACLU was in late 2017 with the Muslim travel ban. We needed to not only have a litigation strategy, but an organizing one as well. Some folks may know the ACLU through our important litigation, and we had to grow to meet the needs of the community. Locally, the ACLU has fought against racially biased stop and frisk practices of the Milwaukee Police Department, which continues to impact policy and policing to this day. The ACLU has fought to protect our children from terrible conditions at Lincoln Hills. The ACLU has testified against harmful anti-trans bills, pushed for resources to protect early voting, released an important report on jail voting, just to name a few things. And the work continues. You'll hear more about that amazing work in a few. But in addition to being on the board, as mentioned, my day job also has a strong partnership and relationship with the ACLU, as do many other local grassroots organizations. In these dark and uncertain times, we know that we need to meet the moment with the urgency it demands and support our community with the love that it deserves. Through the incredible work from the staff and Dr. Brennan's leadership, we're doing just that. Over the summer, the ACLU marched in the Milwaukee Pride Parade, wearing the shirt that I'm wearing today. As a queer Black woman, I was moved by the excitement of the parade goers who saw us. They waved with glee. Trans and non-binary young folks thanked us for standing up against attacks against trans kids, and it was emotional to see how we were received. It was a small example of the impact that we make. Recently, there was a housing circle where folks talked about their experiences and struggles in housing, as well as how it relates to other issues, such as the criminal justice system. The ACLU was present at Juneteenth, and even recently, we cleaned up the park. In the face of adversity, the ACLU stands up for civil liberties by showing up. From Know Your Rights trainings to legal observing and advocacy and so much more, we will be firm in protecting our civil liberties. There's not a shortage of work to be done, and the staff does it boldly and proudly, and I personally am proud of them. Our democracy is under attack almost daily, and sometimes it feels even more so in the state of Wisconsin. 2024 will likely bring more unprecedented attacks on our civil liberties, and we're ready to face them head on. From voting rights to issues of surveillance and mass incarceration, we are prepared to fight. We can only do this work with your support. It's your support that allows us to go hard while we face some of the darkest days in history and in our democracy. I want to share a quote. No change for the good happens without it being imagined first, even if that change seems hopeless or impossible in the present. Help us imagine and dream of a more equitable world together. Become a member or renew. Donate, talk to your friends about the ACLU's important work, become a legal observer or volunteer in many other ways. Connect us to folks. That's how we strengthen our relationships in the community. At the last page of the program, the beautiful program that you see, there are a set of QR codes of ways to support the affiliate. All of that is critical at this time. We are in a strong position because of your support and dedication to the affiliate. Continue to join us on our journey of a more equitable Wisconsin. Let's dream and imagine what can actually be when we come together. Thank you.
Well done, my friend. Good evening, everyone. We've got a room with wonderful humans in it, and we also have some fantastic folks that are joining us online, so I appreciate their presence as well. I'm glad to be with the ACLU community tonight. My name is Dr. Melinda Brennan. I'm the executive director of the Wisconsin affiliate. I've been here almost 2 years, not quite, but closing in. I want to thank you for all the support that you've already provided us and for remaining engaged in a battleground state where the work never stops. I ask that you stay close to us, to the team as well as the mission, because this state and holding its elected officials accountable isn't going to stop all the way through 2024, and we know that for a fact right now. I'm going to invite you to listen to what we've accomplished recently, but also to give you a sense of where our organization is and where we're headed. In the past year, as Angela said, we showed up in community-centered ways as we tried to navigate the political environment as a key and volatile, I'll add, battleground state in the fight for democracy. As our constitutional rights continue to be threatened, we know that the path forward is through community education and empowerment and shared action. We know that when we show up for each other, we show up for our communities, and we show up ready for the hard work ahead. More or less, we have decided on a pathway forward as a team. which is the we can't do it unless we do it together pathway. There's a place for everyone in work, whether they're staff, or board, or volunteers, or donors, or connectors, or key community members. We want to be able to do that work together in partnership. So the question is, who does what work and when? I want to take a moment and explain what the words integrated advocacy mean to us. You'll see in the program that there's a whole section that's dedicated to it, but it's a pretty practical approach. It sounds shiny, but essentially what it means is that we have a three-legged stool of the work that we do. One piece of it is community engagement, one piece of it is advocacy, and one piece of it is legal. When you think of community engagement, I want you to imagine ongoing work that never ends, that there is no end point to it, nothing that can be accomplished so much that that is the moment when we've achieved it and we're done. That means educating the public, operating in partnership with other community members, and showing up in service. So, for example, the park cleaning was not only to be in service to that community, but we did it with another wonderful organization, that being WAP. Some of the best work comes from doing it creatively together and not being overwhelmed by the volume of the work in the state, which would be very easy in Wisconsin. When you think about advocacy, I want you to think about a better Wisconsin for all of us. That means policy and organizing and key relationships across the state, knowing what's happening in school boards as much as in the State House. Sometimes that means showing up in mass with very little notice because our elected officials did not give us the opportunity to program, think ahead, but instead immediately mobilize. Those are key moments too. And when you think of legal, it seems fairly intuitive, but that's defending our rights and keeping those who are not living up to what we've elected them for and or what they've been appointed to do accountable. None of these three things can work very well separated from each other. The ongoing work of community engagement may bring us our clients for impact litigation. When advocacy fails and there are no other avenues to take because all those conversations are foreclosed or run their course, well, that's a key moment for legal as well. But forever, our public, the public of Wisconsin, the rest of our Wisconsinites need to know what's actually happening. And for that reason, community engagement is one of the beating hearts of the organization. The political landscape that we're in is changing, challenging. As Angela said, sometimes we have 2 or 3 news cycles in a day. In these past few weeks, that's certainly true. So I want to give you 2 essentially vignettes of work that happened recently that gives you more insight into how integrated advocacy actually works, as well as how you can be impactful in joining us in whatever way, an open invitation to be a part of our community and active within it. In the current legislature, there are 3 anti-trans bills. They essentially shape a view that trans people are not human, and they should be denied health care and opportunities to be in community with everybody else. It's unacceptable that their very humanity is challenged, and I would say that of any group, but unfortunately we had to mobilize very quickly, and we were able to do that with some wonderful partners in the state. And despite the fact that these bills are very unpopular, and that the volume of testimony from medical practitioners, from organizations like us, from trans people themselves, from family members, from neighbors, from educators, over and over again affirmed their humanity, these bills move forward. We know that this type of legislation, even if it doesn't become law because we have a governor who is likely to veto, no matter what, the conversation itself that refuses the humanity of a group hurts those people in material ways. It hurts them psychologically. It makes the likelihood for them no longer being alive much higher. It is a deadly serious issue. And were any other group that is marginalized facing that, I would hope we would mobilize exactly the same way. We do know that when we support members of our community who are marginalized, that the likelihood that they'll live a long life, that they can actually pursue happiness is far greater. And so this is a current challenge that we're facing literally today. We've got a wonderful board member and a staff member who are waiting to testify. who aren't here with us because they had important work to do elsewhere, with our colleagues and our partners. We know that when we do this work, when we fight for trans people and trans youth, all of us get stronger because we refuse dehumanization tactics. And we refuse the attempt to silence so many people who stand in support of trans folks. Our refusal to allow rights to be removed from one community sends a strong message that we will support each other, that we will show up for each other across difference. And that's pivotal to how our team operates. Another example, which is ongoing, is the threat of impeachment. And I'm not going to tie this to any one person who's in public life, but instead frame it as having to defend democracy against tactics and maneuvers that destabilize our very state, any belief that someone could vote or have their vote counted. And that is why it is absolutely unacceptable. We know that we have some of the most gerrymandered maps in the nation. That is a fact. We know that one party is winning far more seats than would statistically happen. And we should have fair maps, and the public should be able to elect officials that they agree with and believe in, and not have it manipulated. We know that an example of this is initiating a politically motivated impeachment for a state Supreme Court justice who took office recently, and there's no reason to impeach. And whether people voted for her or agree with her, everyone can agree that she was fairly elected by an 11-point margin. There is no question. Well, if someone is elected, whether we agree with them or not, we like their conduct or not, but they have been elected, then they should be in service of the state. That is not that different of a tactic than removing Megan Wolf, who is a very competent election official, who has done nothing wrong. But the challenge comes from believing that the 2020 election was stolen. And so we have two challenges in this state. One against an elected official, one not. Neither of them in good faith, both of them destabilizing what it means to be a Wisconsinite and be able to vote and believe that your vote will be counted and believe that you have some impact that's meaningful on the politics of Wisconsin. And that, quite frankly, is unacceptable. And if there is a worse version of it that is not just about Wisconsinites, it is that we can't allow this experiment to escape the lab. In an era where electoral subversion is on the rise, we know that attacks on democracy happening in Wisconsin can be transported across state lines. If these two tactics pass, that they're successful, the likelihood that they will happen in other states is high, and I don't think any of us want that to be part of our legacy. And so that is some of the work that we're doing as well, whether it's organizing, and that's business owners, as much as it is organizers going out and having conversations in communities. That's lobbying, and that's talking with our community partners. It takes all of the levers that we've got, and potentially future legal work as well. But I'll say this, anything that is an undemocratic project, we will stand against. And it will take all the different types of work we do, community engagement, advocacy, and legal to accomplish it. I'll close with this before we get to our wonderful panelists. I think that we can all agree that there are many differences between us. Differences in identity and community, in belief. We would not agree on every single issue, and yet we're part of this community. Whether that's staff, or board members, donors, connectors, members, volunteers. And I don't think that there's a one of us that would accept a condition where we could be so manipulated politically and feel so powerless and not rise up against it. And that is some of the work that I am most proud to be a part of, when most of the team is involved in resisting something that never should have happened to begin with. And whether that means protecting trans kids or trying to make sure impeachment doesn't happen, that is a part of it. And so the way that integrated advocacy works is you figure out which levers you pull and in what order, and everyone in the team participates in it. And it is likely far more effective, and not just for the moment, but for the long term. And I'm very grateful to do it with wonderful colleagues that I trust deeply. And those are the folks that are on the panel next that I will moderate. And with that, thank you, and we will transition to our panel. By way of introductions, on the far left, we have Tim Muth, who is our wonderful and collaborative interim legal director. In the middle, we have Justice Rao, who is our wonderful director of community engagement, and Amanda Merkway, our advocacy director as well. If you thought it was amusing how they were figuring out where it should be seated, it's because they work together very closely and have that kind of closeness, and that is why we got to experience that together. We've got 3 questions. Everybody has their portion of the work. And if y'all are ready, let me know. Then let's start. The first question is, integrated advocacy is often called the future of activism and is central to how we approach it at the ACLU of Wisconsin. Why is working collaboratively across departments so important to the work?
I think I start with the answer on this one. So from the standpoint of the legal department and thinking about our work in the courts is really important, but we're never just with the work in the courts going to realize the goals that we want to accomplish. And this is why integrated advocacy and working across the departments is so important. And there are really several reasons for this, but they really all come down to this. Courts are never going to order more than the bare minimum required by the Constitution or by a statute. Of course, sadly, government authorities and law enforcement are often doing less than the bare minimum, or they're violating basic rights. And so getting them up to the bare minimum might be a vast improvement. But that's not enough. Let me illustrate it with a concrete example. So in 2017, we brought suit in federal court to correct the conditions at the Lincoln Hills Juvenile Prison in northern Wisconsin. And very early in the case, the judge granted our motion for preliminary injunction. Our motion for preliminary injunction and ordered that those practices had to stop. But that federal judge never could have ordered that the prison be closed. That was far beyond what he would ever have ordered. But the prison is being closed someday in the future. And why? Because of a public communication strategy, because of a major alliance of groups advocating and getting the legislation necessary, getting it passed to close Lincoln Hills. Yet, there was still more work to be done outside of the court. New centers are going to be built for the youth who are no longer going to be at Lincoln Hills and at the Copper Lake School. And at one point, the Department of Corrections suggested that the Felmers Chaney Center in Milwaukee should be the location of the new juvenile center in the Milwaukee area. But in engaging with our communities and talking to impacted people impacted by the prison system, we knew the importance of the Felmers Chaney Center for transitioning people out of our incarceration system. And so with allies, with groups, we joined in the process of advocating that Felmers Chaney would not be closed, and it will not be closed. And instead, a new facility that we still have to advocate for, that it will be a humane and transformative facility for juveniles caught up in the system. So we always have to ask, when we're talking about the legal work that we do, what difference will a court order actually make for the impacted communities that we're serving? and what do those communities want to have happen. And so that's why I think it's so important that I have great colleagues like Justice and Amanda working in community engagement and advocacy and communications, because the courts are never enough.
Great. I think that we all understand up here that in order to make an impact, whether that's in a legislative session or just an impact in our communities, we have to build sustainable and supportive relationships all year round. They can't just end at election cycle. And I think that's something that the community engagement teams, shout out to the community engagement team, prides itself on being a community partner that understands building strong relationships requires patience, consistency, and in a human-centered way that we all understand that we can't do this work if we're not going to be human-centric. We have to support and show up in multiple ways and demonstrate our non-extractive and humble desire to do this work. Without being in the community, what are we doing? Without being in the community, how are we getting their voices heard? How are we offering them seats at the table? And that's why I love the community engagement department, but also why I love working with legal and advocacy and comms, where we're able to have great relationships in the community and connect them to different people doing the work as well.
I think I have learned so much from my teammates in other departments, and specifically Justice, over the last year, and how, like, thinking about advocacy, and so often it is just like a daily grind of awful news cycle. I'm addicted to Twitter, or I'm still gonna call it Twitter forever. And then, some awful thing happens, and then, all right, everybody, drop everything you're doing, drive to the Capitol. I don't know how you're gonna get there, but somehow find a ride to the Capitol, take off work, park, get a parking ticket probably, because this hearing is gonna, like today, hearing scheduled for 11:31, which means it's after the executive session, so it means who knows when it's gonna start, and they're gonna schedule the bill that everybody wants to testify on dead last. So you sit there for 7 hours, not knowing when you're gonna testify, which we have a couple folks doing right now. And thinking about what human-centered means, it's like how much harm to folks who are already directly impacted and harmed by these policies, how much harm are we causing in the process itself? And so I think it's certainly, as we do advocacy work, everybody has different lanes and different expertise that come to bear when you're trying to defeat something or trying to get something passed. And it's that connection to the community to understand, like, what is the actual impact from people who are directly impacted? What is, the analysis of how this statute change would function? And then, how do we communicate what is happening and inspire people to action? But if we're gonna ask for something, like, come out and testify at this thing, how can we be mindful about all that harm that happens in the process, and acknowledge it and show up for people and support them, even when that's kind of how the process has to play out.
I feel, quite frankly, lucky every single day that these are my colleagues. I think what we heard them say, though, is that there is so much more victory than one kind of win. And so we should be thinking about what kind of wins we're looking for, and for who, and why. And can we do it the very best we possibly can with the least amount of harm, the most effectively? Which sets us up for question 2, which is why we are seeing unprecedented attacks on democracy. How do you approach this work in this political environment?
This is simple. If democracy is undermined, a lot of what we've accomplished is going to go away. It's as simple as that. Democracy has to be strengthened to preserve the rights and liberties that we're all about fighting for. Look, as long as there are gerrymandered maps in this state, at the ACLU, we're going to be playing defense. We're going to be fighting a ground battle against attacks on our fundamental rights. I mean, that's the impact, and why this fight to preserve democracy is so important. Thinking about the legal work, the other way the political environment works in the court, works for us, is to recognize that our cases don't operate in a vacuum separate from the political environment. An example is if you take the attacks on our settlement against the Milwaukee Police Department in the Collins Stop and Frisk case, we see attacks on that settlement by conservative political actors who want to show that they are tough in crime. They blame our settlement in the Collins case for supposed increases in crime, as if seeking to have police have reasonable suspicion before they frisk someone, as if seeking to have police not discriminate against persons of color produces reckless driving and homicides. This requires us, when we're doing work in the courts, and recognize that when we speak out publicly, we have to recognize how our work is going to be used by political actors in political contexts, and develop a communications and advocacy strategy that recognizes we are in this very polarized political atmosphere of Wisconsin 2023.
So I guess the question is, how do I approach this work? And I am a conspiracy theorist all day, every day, and I think it's like everything is a data point that is helping you identify a potential pattern. And so we see what's happening in other states, and we're thinking about, okay, how could that play out here? We see, these are the bills that are moving through the legislature. This is what's happening at the local level to the point that we are able to follow it. As soon as someone on the campaign trail uttered the word impeachment, the instinct is to go deep down the rabbit hole and get in the weeds. Okay, what does the Constitution and state statutes say about the grounds for impeachment? What are all the different scenarios for how this could play out? Because sure enough, it turned into maybe something, who knows? There were two separate headlines today. One said, Voss keeps the door open on impeachment, and then the other one said says we're not going to impeach today. So who knows? But everything's a data point. And I think so. One is just being a conspiracy theorist and trying to plan ahead. So when something does happen, it's not like you're having to start from square one with strategy. A second piece is looking carefully at all the ways that anti-democratic measures are happening outside of these big events of impeachment threats or election denialism that turns into legislation or administrative action. And I think about Act 12. So Act 12 was recently passed and signed into law that fundamentally changed the way that the shared revenue formula functions across the state, and I think it was a lifeline for a lot of local governments. And there was also a lot of anti-democratic pieces that were baked into that legislation, in addition to taking away local control from all municipalities from holding in counties advisory referenda. It also, for example, took away the policymaking authority of Milwaukee's Fire and Police Commission. So changes that we're not going to really know the impact for generations, but those are kind of aligned with some of the things that we're seeing across the country happening in states that are a trifecta of anti-democratic political actors. And then I think at the same time, remembering that democracy is local. And when we're thinking about how do we protect voting rights on this large scale, also how do we ensure that some of the most marginalized voters have their ability to cast a ballot and have that access. So right now we're working on a campaign with the Common Council to protect and expand early voting that I think You know, there's only 9 people who run elections in the city of Milwaukee. That's wild. For 180 polling places, 2,000 poll workers, only 9 people. And so, you know, us asking to increase funding and staff for the Election Commission to in turn increase access to more early voting locations for voters who are parents and caregivers, voters with disabilities, voters who are students, folks who are working hourly wage jobs, and that access means their access to democracy. And so, being a conspiracy theorist, paying attention to other stuff that's happening that's anti-democratic, and remembering that democracy is local.
I approach this work by being real. 1,000%. Do I enjoy? No, but I'm for real. Like, I think there's power in vulnerability, so I'm never going to go into a know your rights training with law enforcement and like, oh, Act 12, we're here again. No, that sucks. As a black woman with a black son and MPS, that is horrible and it's scary. So I'm never gonna pretend like the bills that are passing, freedom being taken away, that's not like, oh, well, we're doing another meeting. No, I like to sit in that and like to be real and vulnerable because that allows me to connect with other people on a really human level. We can't pretend that this work doesn't impact us all, because if we do, it's a disservice to our community and to ourselves. There's a cost of knowing, a cost of being impacted, and we have to sit in that. We can't always go to the next one, and we need to be real that everything impacts us, especially historically excluded people. And when we do this work, it's having a real understanding of how to help folks who are in survival mode. We can't keep asking people to show up, to testify, without understanding that they don't know where their next rent is gonna come from. Their light bill might be cut off. We can't say, oh, let's do something about lead in the water. How are you gonna hold the landlords accountable? Those things are really real, and so when we do community events, we make sure we have resources. We make sure we have food. We make sure, like at the last housing that Melissa talked about, people left with housing, resources, and dinner. That is how we show up to the work. Thank you.
Heard was impact, 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 impact. Who is impacted? Why are we doing this work? Not ignoring our own vulnerability in the work, certainly centering the folks that we are trying to be in service to. And so here's the last question, and that is, so what's on the horizon in Wisconsin? How do you want people to engage in this work?
This is a little overwhelming, but I thought maybe a visual would be a little helpful, so I didn't have to just like say this all orally. So even as looking between now and November 2024, a lot of things going on simultaneously that we are paying attention to and have opportunities for folks to engage in along with us. So we are still in the midst of the 2023-2024 legislative session that will continue to run through about March, when they will gavel out. Also, right now, throughout October and then the beginning of the November is the city budget process and county budget process for counties and municipalities statewide, but specifically also here in Milwaukee, where we have one of our campaigns at the city level. Then you look ahead to the next election cycle, which is the spring primary in February, but then the spring election in April, where we have, in addition to a few, I think it's District 1 and District 4 of the Court of Appeals, some state circuit court seats up. We have mayoral and city council races across the state, county executive and county board races across the state. Also the potential for 3 binding referenda that would amend the Constitution. There are 3 joint resolutions currently moving through the Wisconsin legislature that are on second consideration. So in order to amend the Constitution, it needs to be passed in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then it goes to a vote on the next statewide ballot. And so it is that time, and that next statewide ballot is April. And then after that, we have the partisan primary for the general election in August, and then the general election where we have the presidential race, Senate, Congress, Assembly, and Senate unclear exactly which seats are going to be up yet in light of the MAPS litigation, but then also a critically important race. District attorneys statewide are being elected when the vast majority run unopposed. So we're hoping to do some work, education and otherwise related to those races to highlight that DAs have a tremendous amount of power as it relates to voting rights because they are the ones who make the decision to charge things as felonies that can take away someone's voting rights. So a lot on the horizon, and we're excited to dig in to a lot of the different pieces on this slide and hope you will join us. We have a bill tracker on our website that I think there's a QR code too, so if you want to follow along what we are registering for and against, feel free to reach out if folks want to get more deeply involved, and I'll leave it at that.
So if the question is what's on the horizon in Wisconsin, I'm afraid in the coming year, one, we're going to have an unprecedented need to protect our rights to express ourselves, our rights to march in the streets, our rights to express ourselves on social media, our rights to tell our elected officials what we think. And to march, there will be people marching in Milwaukee outside of the Republican National Convention, and they may very well need to go down to Chicago and march outside of the Democratic National Convention. All of that is coming events, and tied to that will be an enormous need to continue to protect our voting rights from ongoing attacks and those who would engage in voter suppression. We will unfortunately see in all of these political campaigns that Amanda listed for us a need to stand up against wedge attacks against LGBTQ and BIPOC folks, where those attacks are used to rouse up the base of political actors in the coming elections. But here's the other thing. Mass incarceration doesn't ebb and flow with the election cycle. Racist policing continues regardless of the administration. The school to prison pipeline still flows regardless of who is in power. So there is ongoing work that we need you to engage with us on these issues that may not be grabbing the headlines during a polarized political year, but that deeply impacts so many members of our communities, even during this very polarized political moment.
So something that's on the horizon for the Community Engagement Department is the Know Your Rights Tour, specifically with law enforcement. Thanks, Thank you. This is in light of the racist police tactics that we are currently seeing in Milwaukee. We have our Youth Social Justice Forum that's coming up.
Yes.
Okay. To get our youth excited about advocating for themselves, give them the tools and resources and how to show up, and more community conversations, because we always want to know how we can do better and be better in our community. So that's just a little bit, but a lot of what's going on, and I'm really excited.
So here's the end note, the through line. We've got wonderful colleagues present and not. Some of the work remains more hidden than others. We couldn't communicate with the public at all if we didn't have an excellent comms team who was telling people what was happening all the time. And no less, everyone else on the team as well who supports the work in various kinds of ways. We've got dedicated volunteers. We've got persistent donors. We've got wonderful board members that show up in a variety of ways. We've got community connectors. We've got all kinds of folks that show up consistently, year after year, event after event. Sometimes they go volunteer with us even. that feels pretty good. But here's my ask. It's not just to stay engaged, which of course we want, but it's also to deepen engagement. There will be so many things to do, so much work to do, and we know an awful lot of that work is going to surround people who are marginalized, people who have been directly impacted by the carceral system, BIPOC folks, youth. Amongst many others, we know that LGBTQ attacks won't stop, and we know in a battleground state, whatever will catch fire will, but we know that disproportionate harm happens to people who have less political power, whose voices often go unheard or unlistened to even when they're really loud. And so here's my ask. It isn't just to stay engaged, because please do. You're valuable and we can't do it without you. The ask is, think about who you are as you show up with us. I want you to walk the walk with us. If you have privilege in one area of your life, and I think all of us do that exist in the United States right now, figure out how to leverage it. If you're really good at something and you have a special skill set, we want to know so that we can use that in our work, we can be together on that, we can partner with that. If you are a fantastic community connector, we want to know that too, because what relationships don't we have that we would be so much stronger, so much more effective if we had those connections? Maybe there's an organization that we should be partnering with because the work could be so much bigger, stronger, louder, visible, effective. If you can give. I do. But however it is that you give your time or your skills or funds or expertise or connections, what we ask is that you think about from what position are you doing it? Because we are a community, this team of people who are the staff of the ACLU Wisconsin, and the board no less. And we all come from different walks of life, and that influences what we can give. The expertise that we have, what we feel comfortable doing, and who will take our call or listen to us. And so know that we are endlessly open to different kinds of help and deeper engagement over time. But also, what can you bring to the table, to this work, this democracy, defense, and empowerment that only you can, that other people might not be able to accomplish? Because we know that we do this for all Wisconsinites, but we also know that the people that are most likely to be negatively impacted are people that are marginalized. And when we stand together, we're effective, and people who are marginalized shouldn't have to do it by themselves, for themselves. And if we show up together, that's a big, loud, effective noise. And so what I ask for you is stay with us, but deepen your engagement and think about how that might be for you as an individual person. And we will be ready to meet you and receive it and figure out how we can do our best work together. And that wouldn't be possible without everyone that's in this room and also joining us virtually, and there's a fair amount of folks there, so thank you for your time there as well. But it would be absolutely impossible without colleagues that populate this room and that also can't be here today. And so I'm just very grateful to be responsible for leading this team in this work. But the request is not just for you to stay with us, but figure out what the next level of engagement can be, and we will meet you there. And that is a promise. And with that, I'm going to open it up for the Q&A. And we've got a question already.
Okay. Let me introduce myself. I'm Peter Goldberg. I've been a member of the ACLU at least for 50 years, starting when I was back in law school. I've served on the local board, I've served on the state board. I've been a legal volunteer for years, starting with the Red Squad suit against Police Chief Breyer, and I filed briefs in the amici briefs in the state Supreme Court on women's issues and one other issue. And I've represented people in the municipal courts, I've testified before the Common Council, I've testified before the legislature, but in the years that I've been there, one of the legs of the stool you pointed to, the legal department, was key. Within the last year, I was so happy when the legal team went up to 5 members. Within the last year, 4 legal people have left, staff people, some of them here a long time, one of them who's now ended up as the legal director at Legal Aid. It did not retire, in fact. Let's see, so the 5th person, from what I understand, is out on a medical leave, which leaves Tim Move, who's a volunteer. And I respect him. I've known him from a long time. I know the work he did at Reinhard Berner. And I think it's noble and wonderful to have him doing this work. But one volunteer lawyer, albeit full-time volunteer interim director, is not enough. And I want to know what you are doing in order, if you are indeed intending to refill or reconstitute a legal team, or does this represent this vague notion of advocacy, integrated advocacy, a change in direction of the Civil Liberties Union with not having a very strong legal department as what I always viewed as sort of the core of the work. And that's going back to Sal Soren, Eunice Edgar, Chris Amity, Chris Ott, and now you, Dr. Brennan.
It's a fair question. We had one piece of it is a change of the guard. But another piece of it is Tim is not alone. One of the key hires that we made recently is a wonderful new colleague, Ryan Cox, who is coming to us from Texas with an impact litigation background and in particular voting rights expertise. And at a certain point, we will have a larger staff, but a piece of the legal work has never been just the Wisconsin affiliate, nor any ACLU doing it all by themselves. One of the greatest strengths of the work that we do is in partnership with legal, and that's no less the case with advocacy or with legal departments. And so that is a key part of the work as well.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask Tim especially a question. For instance, you talked about Act 12, part of which dealt with taking away the powers of the Police and Fire Commission. Has anyone here at the staff looked at the state constitution to see whether the municipal home rule section of the Constitution and the maintenance of freedom with the frequent recurrence to fundamental principles might be a grounds to challenge it? Do you have enough people to go into a sophisticated constitutional issue like that?
So Peter, with respect to Act 12, I can't talk specifically at the level of research into that. What I will say is that we are in a very conscious rebuilding effort, and the colleagues who we have lost who are dear friends of mine, and I won't minimize that. But I'm also very confident with the hire of Brian Cox, Dr. Emma Shakeshaft, who will be returning from family leave and continuing her important work. We are actively in the process of hiring more people that, yes, there's been a changing in the guard, and those of us who have been, I'm now the longest serving member of the staff for 7 years, but I do have a commitment to this work of rebuilding the legal staff, and I know that I'm supported by Dr. Brennan and the board in that commitment as well.
Thanks, Tim. We have a couple of questions here. Oh, I'm sorry, Angela, don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
I was just gonna jump in as vice president of the board, and I know folks were trickling in during some of my remarks and may not have heard what I had mentioned before, but being able to have this integrated advocacy approach, as Justice had mentioned, being able to be out in the community actually strengthens the legal departments and vice versa, and people understanding they have access to the ACLU in more ways than just litigation. As a longtime organizer of many years and as someone that grew up pretty much in this program, it wasn't always the case that community members felt that they had a way to plug into the ACLU unless they were a plaintiff. I don't know if I agree if that is how we needed to continue our work. As I mentioned also in my remarks, there has been a shift, specifically since the Muslim travel ban, with an increase of membership and folks that wanted to plug in. Those options are limited if we continue to only solely focus on the litigation. And I believe wholeheartedly that Amanda, Justice, and Tim have done an excellent job in talking about how they all work together as a legal team, right? Even though they are not lawyers themselves, they are also able to provide, that's right, Amanda, sorry, you are a lawyer. Being able to provide that critical information. I am speaking from an organizer and as a director of an advocacy organization. I get almost daily text messages from Amanda. And I say that in the most loving way possible, because I do, right? I'm not a lawyer, and I'm here filling in for William, the chair, who is a lawyer, but understanding as a community member and as a longtime member of this affiliate, this only strengthens our future and our position. And I understand, change is a little scary sometimes, but this is how we meet the moment to the most marginalized folks that we are actually trying to help.
We have a lot of great discussion happening online as well. Lots of folks chiming in and a part. We do have a couple of questions from our virtual audience. The first is a question from Joe. He'd like to know, is the ACLU of Wisconsin chiming in on the fair maps situation?
Let me very carefully answer that question. It's a good question to ask. We historically have been part of a coalition that wants fair maps. I don't think that anybody who, in any part at all, agrees with the fact that we have one of the most gerrymandered states. That's work that has to be done. The answer is yes, and the question is, when is the best time to be a part of that work? Not all work happens on the front end. Some of it means thinking about mobilizing people and keeping them engaged over the duration, and then thinking about advocacy here, and then also the kind of expertise that we have on the team now. There are, right now, meetings that are happening to determine how our strategy best fits with that challenge, and that is also with our national partners as well, who think that the work of turning Wisconsin to a fair state with maps that are representational matters. And so that work crosses all of the departments of the affiliate. It means community education, and that is entirely coming from our community engagement department. It means people understanding and having things translated for them so that it is not endlessly technical, and also mobilizing them, and that means advocacy. And then, of course, it means legal engagement with a strategy that matches the moment. And right now, given the impeachment conversation, it's fairly uncertain what turn it will take, and we're going to have to wait until mid-November to know what the best strategy actually is. And Amanda, Tim, if you want to chime in, by all means.
No.
They don't want to touch it. Well,
No,
we do.
I mean, just that there are ongoing, a lot of ongoing strategy conversations, not just within the ACLU, but us in connection with the other partners. I mean, there is an amazing amount of legal talent from all across the country already entering their appearances in front of the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and how that plays out we are figuring out what our lane is.
I just have one more from the virtual, from Cherry, who's watching us from Green Bay. She'd like to know, what is the ACLU doing in terms of housing in Wisconsin and socioeconomic discrimination?
What a great question. We just had a beautiful housing community circle, also done by our statewide advocate coalitions, and Nick, who's in the back of the room, so please clap for Nick. Thank you. And that circle was powerful, it was vulnerable, and we did that with community partners. So it looked like creating the space, again, having resources for folks, food, leaving them feeling connected. We actually had someone leave that community circle finding housing for them and their children. So we are having these conversations and providing resources. I think it's important that ACLU may not always have the answer. We may not be the best fit, but what we can do is connect people to get them those answers.
Is the ACLU involved in the constitutionality issues about the abortion bans in Wisconsin?
Okay, everyone's going to take a turn, is what I just gathered there. So the reality is that Planned Parenthood is the leader in the state, and much respect to them for their work on these issues. There are other issues that are likely to emerge, and we have been in conversation with not only our national partners, but also other law firms that we have done previous work with before. Essentially, my answer is, we know that the current challenge ahead of us and how it may turn out in a short amount of time or not, that will not be the last challenge to reproductive justice. It will not be the last attempt to diminish people's access to life-saving health care, and we know that. And so, in part, the answer is support, and in part, the answer is planning for a future that's uncertain, but we imagine that a challenge is coming, and that we have to be ready for that.
And I guess what is the support if we don't have legal? What are we doing without legal?
We do have legal, and we are part of a national team that focuses on reproductive justice. I'm going to turn it over to Tim to be able to talk more about it. But the next challenge,
Well, especially in Wisconsin with that, I mean, it's got to be pretty focused.
So right now, the focus of work in the courts is on the Attorney General's case on the abortion bill. That decision will come down, and then we'll be going through the appellate process in the state of Wisconsin. We have been
ACLU will be?
well, the Attorney General is leading that case. At the appellate level, we have been approached, and I believe that we have largely made a commitment to file an amicus brief on a number of issues, and our legal team here will be working with the Reproductive Rights Project of ACLU National in the amicus brief that at this point I can't disclose the particular tact that we are going to be taking on that. It's not, our job is not to just say everything Josh Call said, ditto, right? We want to provide a particular focus. It is likely on the impact of abortion bans on marginalized communities, and making sure that the court has that bigger picture, as well as talking about constitutional issues, and there'll be coordination, as there always is with amicus briefs. But we are fully committed to participating at the appellate level on that case.
I I know when I try to find information on what ACLU is involved in Wisconsin, it's hard to find. I mean, I see blips in the paper, but going on your website, I'm not finding out what we're doing. I mean, I see no comments in the paper. When ACLU was approached, there's no comment. We don't have a position. And that, to me, is concerning. I mean, on the abortion issue, when it first, you know, and I just would like more able to access information on what we're doing.
I guess I can start. So on our website, if I'm picturing it correctly, there's like an action page where it gives you options to engage directly. It shows you all of our events. It shows you any message actions or petitions that are currently active. Then there's a section that says, you know, what are we doing or what's going on. There is a legal page that outlines kind of all of our ongoing legal work. There's a page about community engagement and opportunities to volunteer and youth programs. And there's a second section that is the bill tracker that shows all of the bills that we have registered for and against, along with all of the testimony that we provided, kind of attached on each individual bill page. I feel like, so our comms director sends out press clips to staff and the board weekly, and there's usually at least, I say on average, at least 5 media mentions a week.
I have access to your website, and I have gone through the legal posting, but again, it just doesn't have enough information on what we're doing on certain topics. And when I try and contact, it's really hard contacting you. And I'm in the same building as you guys. You guys are, I'm never able to go down and just go in the door. I mean, and I can't get phone calls. It's just hard to access other than to get information, for me anyway.
What I'd say to that is our social media presence is very strong. Our website is updated consistently, and we're happy if you are interested in deeper levels of engagement. We are happy to connect because maybe the edge that you want is being involved in the work and knowing earlier when things are happening. And there are absolutely those kinds of opportunities to engage going forward. So I would just...
Yeah, because I'm an investigator, and I've done work throughout the years in the building with the legal team. So, but I don't have any access to what's happening anymore. And like I say, can I just go down and walk in like we used to? I can't do that anymore, can I?
No, and we're getting towards the end, and so I'm going to invite for opportunity for continued conversation. I know that like times have changed. For those who don't know me, I'm Tina Itzen, I'm the development director here. Times have changed, and honestly, one of the concerns that is high on our list is security. And we know that this is an issue. And so, yeah, we may not be as accessible to just come to the door. But, you know, one of the things, we have new development department, we have folks here who are working really hard to engage with the community. Our phone numbers are always open, our emails, call us, set up a meeting. We are happy to meet and have a conversation. And, you know, to connect more, to learn more about what's happening. You know, we want to have these robust conversations. We want to know what the paths are forward, but we can do that together. Yes, there are additional challenges that we have in this day and age with the way that you know, we were at the Capitol last week testifying and someone walked in with a firearm. Like this is the world we live in, and the way that we do our work is making sure that we're all safe while we do our work.
Well, you're getting new security doors now. I mean, so shouldn't that be able to?
We're happy to talk
We're
about
going
security
to
at another time,
Yeah.
but part of the responsibility I've got is to make sure that this team is safe, and finding new ways of being accessible is always part of the goal.
So I just want to thank all of you for being here and for the folks who have been online with us. Doing this hybrid kind of meeting, it's a new thing for us. We had a lot of folks with us. I want to thank everyone for being here. There's lots of ways that you can get involved in your annual report that you have on your table. There's lots of QR codes and ways to connect with us. Also, information on your tables about the campaigns that are happening here in Milwaukee. If you are local here, make sure that you know who the people are that you need to talk to in the State House and in the local government. And if you're not from Milwaukee, we've got resources to help you get connected to your local folks as well. Finally, I just want to make a huge shout out to all of the vendors and sponsors all of those, especially Studio Gear for being here and making the tech. Not tech savvy, thank you so much. And for all of our panelists for being here. This is a great opportunity to share with you. And let's continue the conversation. We want to hear what's important to you, and we want to share with you what we're up to as well. So thank you very much.